All right, there we go. Welcome, everyone. And so I'm Lee Chazen. I'm here with Sergei Sputnikoff and Vladan Lausevic. And today we're going to be talking about a lot of things related to Eastern Europe, the former Soviet Union, Russia today, the war that's going on, and try to get some questions answered, because I know there's people out there with a lot of questions right now. And it seems like, Sergei, your work, the work that you do must be more important now than ever, because people want to learn about what is Russia all about. You know, who is Vladimir Putin? What led to this? And you know, you lived in the Soviet Union, so maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
All right. Well, just for a short introduction, I was born in Kiev, Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic back in 1971. So I was 20 when Soviet Union collapsed back in 1991. And I lived in 1995, I came first time to America to work on exchange program. And then several years later, back in 1998, that's when I had a blind date and ended up staying in America. And since then, I live in Michigan. And you know, I was totally wrong about this recent events with war, because growing up in Soviet Union and growing up in Kiev, it's the capital of Ukraine, but I'm a perfect product of the Soviet society. I'm a Russian-speaking Ukrainian. Like in Kiev, which is capital of Ukraine, there was hardly any schools that had Ukrainian language like main. So I grew up speaking Russian, and I speak better Russian than Ukrainian. So like if I say right now I'm fluent in Russian, then I'm fluent in English, and then my third language would be Ukrainian, which I will struggle speaking because I'll be putting in probably English words here and there. So I grew up, half of my friends were Russians, and, you know, it was little kind of things here and there. I actually recorded a video about Russians and Ukrainians during the Soviet Union, but it was nothing like a level of hate and distrust that we experience right now. And as I mentioned, people were asking me, did I believe in possibility that war can start? And I was totally like, absolutely, it's not possible. I was totally wrong, as we know it now. And my main reason is like, we're like brotherly people, you know, Ukrainians and Russians, Slavic people, we have so much in common. But a lot of things changed since 1991, you know, since 1999, when Putin became a president of Russia. You know, when I moved to America, I don't watch Russian or Ukrainian TV anymore. I completely removed myself, you know, my family, my wife is an American. My kids don't speak Ukrainian, Russian, or I'm not proud of it. It just happened. So I'm kind of like got Americanized. So I was removed completely. I didn't understand how much propaganda was going on in Russia and how much hate was built in Russian people against Ukrainians, especially since 2014.
It doesn't seem like a natural rivalry at all. And I do have a solution to this, which would be to just have the Ukrainians and the Russians blame the Jews. I'm just kidding.
Right.
Because I am Jewish, and that has happened in history a lot. That would probably be a nice temporary solution, but I'm not serious. But there's no real rivalry between those. I mean, like Zelensky was a comedian doing a show in Russian to the Russian people,
and they
liked him. Yeah,
you know that he is Jewish, right? He's a Russian-speaking Jew, and he is neo-Nazi. So this is how people can match these two. Russian-speaking Jewish person is neo-Nazi government, but this is how good you could be in your propaganda, that you can convince people that it's totally matching. But you're correct. Back in we actually had this rhyme. Maybe Vladan understands it. Если в кране нет воды, значит выпили жиды. If there is no water in the faucet, it means Jews drink it all. That's pretty much what had this expression. So you always blame Jews on everything. So yeah, I kind of grew up. It wasn't that hardcore, but like my father, I mean, his mother, so my grandma, she actually was hiding Jewish family during the German occupation, but they were still quite anti-Semitic. So this is kind of strange. She risked her life and life of her children hiding Jewish family in her house, but they still didn't like Jews.
Well, that's the story that I heard too, is that my great aunt and her brother, my grandfather, chased out by the Cossacks, went to Poland first, I think. But the man and his family who kept my aunt in the basement gave her stale bread and tea, but didn't like them very well.
Yeah.
And so when I went to Poland in 1984 during Solidarity, it was on this music tour. And I remember my great aunt was very upset with me because she said the Polish people were not very nice to her. But they were also helpful at the same time, like you were saying.
Yeah, that's a strong combination.
There are some similarities when it comes to my, let's say, kind of post-communist, post-Yugoslav history, because I was born in 1989, when the Berlin Wall was destroyed, basically was removed, and my parents were at that time hoping for some kind of a better future, like democracy, economic openness, globalization, and so on, and more open and free world. But the opposite happened. We had bloody wars in former Yugoslavia, and especially in Bosnia, where I was born. And I remember these things, like both during the war and after the war. So partly, how people are behaving in a very irrational, contradictory, inconsistent way. So the same people who support the war, support war crimes, support destruction, they also say, oh, but Serbs and Muslims, or Serbs and Bosniaks, are the same people. And we are all the same people. And the war is actually organized by United States and NATO and European Union. And then they also in some cases, they actually help. Oh yeah, I helped a Muslim guy or a Serb guy, but only because he was he's a good Muslim, not the bad one. So I recognize this kind of rhetoric, this kind of communication that's now has been, that has been organized mostly from the Russian sides, Russian state propaganda, Russian state media, political narratives towards Ukraine, disregarding territory, religion, identification, nation, people. I really see kind of a repetition of human stupidity from the Balkans in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And unfortunately, for example, I have that kind of family background. So many people in my family were, let's say not like many, but most of my father's side, they were involved in the Yugoslav, like say, military industrial complex, in the armed forces, in the government. And for them, how to say, this idea of preserving Yugoslavia at any cost was very vital. So it was so important for them. They believed in this kind of propaganda, this kind of war machine. And I see this kind of behavior now in Russia among many people, that they are so, into that, indoctrinating that propaganda, they don't realize what's happening, for real, so to say.
Back to your question, Lee, about rivalry. It's pretty much the main issue is Putin is subscribed to idea of the Russian world, Ruski Mir, and the concept that Ukraine was created by Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, so created by Bolsheviks in 1922, and that Ukraine shouldn't exist. And that's pretty much like the big idea behind the war, is to restore Russian Mir, Ruski Mir, Russian world, and take what belongs to Russia and put Ukraine back that it belongs, like as a small Russia. There's another term that came up Ukraine is actually small Russia, Malorussia. So you have a white Russia, Belarus, small Russia, Ukraine, and then great Russia, Russia. So there's really not rivalry, just we are like small brothers of the big brother, and big brother wants everything back to where it belongs.
Well, that's interesting, because I went to this meeting on China here in Sacramento, and it was being led by this guy who lived in China and taught there. He wasn't Chinese, but he taught there for 8 years, and he was giving this lecture. There was a guy there from Indonesia, and he said the same thing about China, that we're just all the little children, the different Asian countries, and the China itself is like the father. And we're allowed to go play in the backyard and have friends and run in the street, but they make all the rules.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if it's the same thing, with this idea of a Soviet Union and all these Slavic states together. And if he has this grand vision, because some are saying, I heard this morning on this New York Times podcast that there are plans to maybe go further, that the idea was Ukraine would be done in 7 days or so. And then let's go to Estonia next. And now let's go to Moldova.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's pretty much, I started paying attention now to Russian propagandists, and like one of them, Solovyov, was really like screaming, you think we're going to stop at Ukraine? We're going to go back to 1997 situation. So that's next will be Moldova. Then, of course, Baltic states. And Belarus is already entangled with Russia. Lukashenko sold off his country for cheap oil and gas a long time ago. So, yeah, that's just, it's way worse than I expected. That when I realized I don't know if I made a video about it. One Russian website, RIA Novosti, they published an article on the 26th of February, so 2 days after invasion.
Yes.
And an article was called Россия наступает, наступает русский мир. So Russia is advancing, Russian world is advancing. And it was pretty much complimenting Putin for making this historical decision on not postponing the Ukrainian question, solving Ukrainian question at his time, because it'll be way more complicated later. And if you remember, there is other guy way back who was solving another question that was Jewish question, and that was Adolf Hitler, and he was working on his Lebenstraum, right?
Lebensraum.
Lebenspace. So this is totally, it's a peas in a pod with the expression Putin, Hitler, Russian world, Lebenstraum, solving Jewish question, solving Ukrainian question. Olympics in Sochi, annexation of Crimea. Olympics in Berlin, annexation of Austria. It all goes like it's the same, just different time, but exactly same situation.
And for example, now in Balkans at this moment, so in Serbia, and this is also among the ministers of the Serbian government, they're also communicating for the last, let's say, I would say 8 months about the Serb world. And they are also communicating about this idea of kind of creating a new Serbia. And Milosevic, that was in power in Serbia, like during the 90s, early 2000s, he was speaking about solving the Albanian question. And then he sent the army to Kosovo province to kill people, to force them out of Kosovo, only because they are Albanians. And unfortunately, these ideas are still living. It's unfortunate. The thing is that ideas are living longer than humans, for the good and the bad, so to say. So 30 years after divorce in former Yugoslavia, this kind of rhetoric ideas are still existing. The only thing is now that there are many other ideas that are competing with them. But you are describing here, Sergei, with the kind of the Russian world idea. I know it's partly connected to this intellectual, like, pseudo-fascist intellectual Alexander Dugin, who has inspired Putin with this kind of Euro-Asian idea and so on.
and that you still have a massive country in Russia. With 11,
still the biggest, largest country in the world.
Yeah, it's still a massive country, and you could still build up your economy. You could build up your tech sector. There's plenty of land. It's just that maybe there's.
Shrek?
I'm sorry.
Have you seen the movie Shrek?
Shrek,
yeah.
There is a part that describes Russia perfectly. When they came to that castle, remember that part when they came to this giant castle in Ring of Fire, and they say, "Sure, it's big, but look at the location." Russia is huge, but it's like Canada. If you move Russia over to Northern America, just kind of overlap geographically, you'll see that it's pretty much like Canada. It's huge, but it's useless. Most of the territory is not good for the humans to live. Like, you can live there, but it's really miserable experience. You can dig a hole and mine something out of it, have a little town, but it's really expensive because it's so cold in the winter. Building roads is, so Russia is just Canada, even bigger, because Crimea, to give you an example geographically, south of Crimea, which is the most southern part of Ukraine or Russia, it's where the Michigan is. Like, I live here, southwest Michigan. This is Crimea. The rest of Russia is north.
Yeah, Moscow is equivalent latitude to Anchorage, Alaska, I was told. And then Odessa, I think, is the same as Chicago.
Correct.
Yeah. So even though that's
Russia is it's really a bad location.
So I'm wondering, no one's talked about that part of it, but I'm sure there's some envy that goes on, thinking, oh, Ukraine, you have beautiful access to the Baltic. We don't. We are not Baltic, but the Black Sea.
Black Sea, yeah.
It's the history of Ukraine is really bad. Like, if you look at the history of Ukraine, it's the country, a nation that got between rock and a hard place, right? So you had Poland or Austro-Hungarian Empire in the west, and then Russia in the east. So it's constantly, they always were separated. That's why there's such a huge difference in mentality right along the Dnieper River. Eastern Ukraine is quite a bit pro-Russian, and Western Ukraine is, it's totally, it's different people. Even back in my days when I lived in Ukraine, those Ukrainians were different. We called them Zapadenцы, the Westerners. Like, even their Ukrainian language is different. They mostly Catholic. So Ukraine is, it's a really interesting combination of these two. Both are Ukrainians, but they have a completely different history and different attitude. So.
Well, so you brought up, the border with Poland, or you brought up the fact that it's Catholic. And I remember from my trip there in 1984, there were Soviet tanks in the streets there in Warsaw. Lech Walesa was in hiding, he was in prison at the time. And, but the one safe place you could go, this is where I was a musician traveling with other musicians, and we performed in the cathedrals because it was a safe place. And we were told that about 90% of the country there was Catholic or more. And the Russians or the Soviets at the time wouldn't dare do anything to the church. And so I'm wondering if maybe that's missing in Ukraine somehow. It seems like the Catholics had the protection of the Polish had the protection of the Catholic Church.
It's hard to tell, but it's just, it's one of the reasons I was doubting that Putin will dare to attack Ukraine is because it took Stalin 12 years after the end of the Great Patriotic War to subdue the Western Ukraine. They fought Stalin war machine and KVD, regular troops, for 12 years. So it's like the whole idea that they can just roll into Ukraine and take over in 7 days or take Kiev over in 96 hours was just like, you need to be on some serious drugs considering such a thing that you can just roll country size of Texas, the second largest country in Europe, population 44 million, and they think we're just gonna like kitty cat drop on our back and all right, we're ready, tickle us. So yeah, it's really strange.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Putin wasn't expecting this level of resistance, and I don't think anyone saw this happening. Like when Vladan and I talked the first weekend of the invasion, I remember thinking at the time that Kiev was going to fall in a matter of days after that.
I mean, I myself, I didn't know what to think. I mean, first of all, I totally didn't expect. And another reason was like, besides, all that my naivety from the Soviet days that Russians will never fight Ukrainians, it's the really bad time to attack in the end of February. It's when Rasputitsa, you have a mud everywhere except roads. So you're stuck on the roads. So attacking with all your equipment, you can't fan out on the fields. You're just stuck. So if you watch any videos, it's equipment stuck and abandoned in the field, Russian equipment, or burned down on the roads. But you see, Ukraine changed a lot since 2014. They learned their lesson, and they, I think, realized like that Russian bear will not stop. It will stay hungry. It will eat Crimea. It will eat Eastern Ukraine. It will keep on going. So they, for 8 years, they were getting ready. They rotated they have draft in Ukraine. So they pretty much rotated all their troops through this Eastern Ukraine. So pretty much everyone had a battle experience during their military service. And they were just building up their forces. And I mean, I don't know how much America and other Western powers were involved helping out, but they actually built a strategy how to resist Russia in case of invasion. So some people were talking about invasion back in several years prior. So they come up with the strategy that there is no point to fight Russia right at the borders because they're just gonna, destroy them. So they just let them in, stretch their communication lines, and then they went behind and started chopping and cutting and destroying. So it was strategy in place. I mean, it wasn't. It was surprise attack, but they knew what to do, and they knew. I mean, there was enough leaked information. I mean, Bild, even German magazine, published the map of supposed attack, and it's happened. Just like that, Crimea, from the north, from the south, from all the directions. So it's.
What do you think about the American response so far and NATO?
I have mixed feelings. If we look back at if West will do sanctions like they did now back in 2014 when Russia occupied Crimea, we won't be talking right now about war in Ukraine. Because that sanction they applied now, they crippled the Russian economy in 1 week. So that's kind of, I blame West for being so, I don't know what the proper word, not relaxed. It's all about money. I was telling my friends back in Ukraine, don't expect any serious help from America because there is no oil. If Ukraine had a huge oil reserves, there'll be air carriers, there'll be everything here. I mean, remember Kuwait, little tiny country, and what happened when Iraq attacked that country? So every time there is oil involved, America really cares about democracy. When there is no oil, there's a challenge there. It's just historically, you look Iraq, you look Libya, all those places had a lot of oil. Ukraine had nothing. And the response was lukewarm. Let's put it that way. It was lukewarm response, right?
And I'm sure, Churchill would have said the same thing in World War II. Look how long it took. I mean, it took us a long time to react to, both World War I and World War II. We needed a reason. So in World War I, it was the sinking of the Lusitania was part of it. In World War II, Pearl Harbor. But I'm not sure what got us to war or to help out in Europe. We were very late in getting there. Hitler had already taken over Poland, if I remember.
Oh yeah.
correctly.
I mean, even there was a period of so-called strange war because British and French, they announced war against Germany, but they didn't do anything besides this little bombing here and there. But it's always this hope that, you can appease the dictator. You can just give him a little bit, let's give him Czechoslovakia and he'll be happy, It's just, and the same with Putin, okay, he took Crimea, sure, we slapped him on the hand, you're a naughty boy, and he's just like, okay, well, let's see what happens if I take you Eastern Ukraine. Okay, still nothing. That might as well go for whole Ukraine. I mean, history just repeats. And, it's not really like American job to run around the world and, make sure everyone behaves properly, but it's kind of this expectation out there. So definitely.
Well, we also know what happens when we do get that war machine moving is, I tell people now that we're still seeing the effects of ramping up for World War II. If you go to any Army surplus store, you can still buy equipment and supplies from World War II, and the whole defense industry started then, and war production, and we're still kind of a military industrial complex here in the United States because of what we did then. And so if this turns out to be something like that, I think everyone's predicting how big it will get, how it will escalate. For example, if we do this no-fly zone.
The no-fly zone is you can't do that. It's like a poker game. If you're not playing to play the card, you just buff. You're not gonna do it because you need to shoot down Russian planes. That's direct, kind of attack on Russia. Russia has nuclear weapons, so that's totally out of question. The only way they can do it is bring equipment to shoot down plane. Let Ukrainians do it. Just like Russia, Soviet Union did it in Vietnam. They brought their rockets and let Vietnamese or Russian advisors, instructors, to shoot down American planes. So I see totally proper Americans to do the same thing.
And I can also add to that regarding those aspects that I, as a European, can feel embarrassed, and I can feel it's a very negative experience that, for example, when I was in high school in like 2004, 2005, that period. So I was reading about the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, and I was so kind of supportive. I was so positive and optimistic at that time, for democracy. And then later on in 2014, Maidan Revolution, I was also very supportive. And 1 year later, I even went to Ukraine for the first time. But I also know that many people around in Europe, they actually had the completely opposite opinions. They didn't support the Maidan Revolution because they would brand it as a far-right coup, or they would brand it as, let's say, how to say that, it's kind of provoking Russia, and why do we need Ukraine, the European Union? Yeah, that kind of behavior. And the thing is that people who, my experience from Ukraine is that many Ukrainians, they feel more, let's say, European than many of us in the European Union identify ourselves as Europeans. So, this is kind of in one way a paradox, but that's the reality. And I would say, like, the European Union has still not done enough to provide enough support to Ukraine. I mean, both before 2014 and after 2014.
So in the West, we liked Gorbachev. He seemed like he was going to really change the Soviet Union with glasnost and perestroika, economic restructuring, openness. And there was even, this ban on vodka, which I wanted to ask you about and how that went. Yeah. I heard that there was a potato shortage that followed that because they were making vodka in their bathtubs to replace the vodka that wasn't on the shelves. But what was the impression of Gorbachev? And I'm wondering if that kind of paved the way for we need to go back to when we were strong. You know, this, I've talked to Vladan about this before too, this kind of longing for the old powerful Soviet Union, when everyone felt, you know, it maybe affected people on an individual level because they felt they were part of a strong nation. So I wondered if either one of you could speak to that.
Well, what I can tell from my experience, well, you know, I was, when Gorbachev became a leader, so we're talking like what, 85, 84, somewhere there.
Yeah.
I was like 13, 14. So I was the perfect age. I was excited about changes. I was at that point when I started kind of noticing, you know, bad parts of living in socialism. So for me, it was always, you know, there was a lot of excitement those years. I wasn't into drinking, so it didn't bother me that vodka disappeared. Of course, there was a lot of dark humor about all that. And, you know, it created, you know, that anti-alcohol campaign, besides moonshining, and also that's what started drug abuse. Before that, people, was hardly any drugs. People pretty much drink vodka, or, you know, beer, wine, whatever. It's the shortage of alcohol that's created as young people went, like in Ukraine, we always grew poppies. You may, you know, for baking, you know, poppy seeds. Never had issues with that. Like, you can grow poppies, it was just never even thought. And then in the end of 80s, that's when it became like you can grow anything, because people snuck at night at your garden and they cut every poppies to make, you know, heroin. So that was the side effect. And of course, it was a huge impact on the budget of Russia, of Soviet Union, because state had monopoly of making alcohol. So by cutting down production, the revenue dropped drastically. But generally, like, I remember it was finally interesting to read newspapers. It was finally interesting to watch TV. Like, end of 80s, there was so much excitement just because it was like, we didn't know which newspapers to subscribe. They all publishing something about Stalin and about, you know, World War II. All this information we couldn't hear before. So that was a lot of excitement. But of course, after collapse, and then it was quite ugly early 90s. And so there is quite a bit of people, as you mentioned, they do miss, you know, everyone respected us kind of. We had Soviet Union, we were a world power. And this is really bizarre part, this mentality of former Soviets. This is kind of flushed out of my brain. Many people remain it. They would prefer to go to outhouse and wipe their butts with newspaper, but knowing the fact that we have the best nuclear missile in the world. You know, it's such a disconnect that I'm looking back. For me, it was totally normal. Like, I lived in Kiev, so, you know, like second biggest city in the Soviet Union, or third after Moscow and Leningrad. But I drive in the village to stay with my grandparents, and it's literally like at least 50 years back or 75. People still use horses to plow fields, no running water, no, pretty much like my grandparents didn't have a refrigerator. They used cellar, outhouse, getting water in the well, borrowing horse from the collective farm to plow the field. So for me, it was totally normal. You just go out of town and it's like Amish country. But we were first in space, and we all were proud of it. So I totally accepted these two opposite realities of being so advanced in some areas that made everyone proud. And then everyone lives really like basic in the country, especially. So a lot of people still, they, like in Russia, they totally don't mind having dirt roads that you can barely pass in the spring. But they're so proud that Putin went to Syria to help a Syrian leader, because in Syria, it's really important for Russia to protect our interests. I was like, do you see your roads? Like, who cares what's going on in Syria? You know, but people don't mind. There's a lot of people like that. They have that, they want that pride, and they don't mind to suffer. Like, yeah, we can wipe our butts with newspapers as long as the newspaper says that we are the best.
Yeah, this is something I also recognize from growing up in Bosnia, because I grew up in the, let's say, in the Serb part, or the part of Bosnia that is called the Serb Republic. This was, you know, basically created through war crimes, through genocide, to killing people and so on. And I also recognize this kind of mentality, like, yes, we are poor, but we had this king 800 years ago, and we had this kingdom at that time and large territories, and now we are kind of more united, and we didn't this and that, I don't know, 300 years ago, 800 years ago, and the 90s was like some kind of a prime time, of how to say, kind of being a Serb and so on. And one thing I really wanted to ask you, Sergei, because these are the things that you are telling to people, to your followers on your Ushanka Show YouTube channel. So how did you came up with the idea to start a show based on your personal history, on your family history, on your experiences, and how to say, how do you experience that that the people are still that there are many people who are following you, like really interested in the history of not only of the Soviet Union, but also the Ukraine during the Soviet times, let's say?
Well, it was kind of, so I work at the local power plant. We make electricity, and there's an operator, and that job is sometimes during night shifts. It's like you done your part, you took your readings, and then it's like you just need to be there, right? So there's not much going on. So people just they say it in America, they bullshitting. They just sit around, they talk about families, about a lot of Americans talk about sports, sports scene. And I sometimes will chime in. They'll say something. I was like, oh yeah, by the way, I remember, back when I was in the Soviet Union, and I noticed like it's becomes dead silent and everyone start paying attention. And it's like a lot of information I'll say, they'll be shocked, like, oh, you were, smuggling vodka to Poland. Oh my God, tell us about it. So I noticed there was a lot of this really like pent up interest. Every time I chime in, it was like, hey, by the way, back in Soviet Russia, we did this. And I was like, oh, there's really a lot of interest. And then my wife was like, you got such a great stories, because, I'll tell my children, about my Soviet childhood. And I was like, well, I'll try it, see what happens. Because I already had a Russian YouTube channel, telling Russians about life in the United States. I was like, well, let me see if I'll do this. And I wasn't sure, with my accent and how that will go. But, there's a specific, group of people that really interested. Some had something with former Soviet Union. Someone went to work there. Some people traveled. And then I kind of became interested in like, oh, I need to learn more about it. And so I met a lot of, interesting people with unusual histories that, interested my channel. Like I have a guy who went to Russia in late 70s to work on KAMAZ. So there was a huge truck factory built.
Yeah.
And he went from America to work there for like a year, because it's all built on Western technology. And they never told us that, but equipment came from the United States, all that. So yeah, that was kind of cool.
No, it's fascinating. And so I don't know if I was so intrigued by this myself that in college, I declared a concentration in Russian East Central European studies, because to me, I thought that was the most fascinating thing in the world at the time. This is in the mid 80s, when Reagan was president. I thought, I want to study this. And so, I just had so much curiosity about that part of the world. Yeah, so I was going to say I worked on this trade mission in the late 80s. It was just an accident that my boss at the time, he was running for political office, and I was a political science graduate. And so I was his campaign manager, and he wanted to take these Silicon Valley executives over to Moscow and see if we could get some trade going. And I had, at the time, was reading a book by Armand Hammer, the Occidental Petroleum guy, and he had known every single Soviet president since Lenin, and always had good relations, and was able to bring. He was, I think, responsible for bringing, Smirnoff vodka or whatever it was to the United States, or Stolichnaya or whatever. Yeah. He made that possible because that's how they were able to trade. And so I was just honored to be a part of this. And I remember the business owners came back from there, and of course, I asked them, how we had meetings after they got back. I said, well, is any trade going to be possible? And they said, well, capitalism is new for them. And so their business practices are a little bit different than American business practices. And
Right.
so they were being offered, in exchange for their silicon chips and motherboards and all that kind of stuff, they were being offered, either caviar or Russian stack dolls, or in some cases, prostitutes, or I heard all kinds of stories.
Right.
And I thought, it's not going to happen right away.
That's why we don't have Trump Tower in Moscow, right?
Right. Yeah. It's very, very difficult. Even I was in charge of corresponding with some of the Moscow City Council members. And I remember we would get these faxes back, and the typing, you could tell it was done on a typewriter, not on a computer.
Right. Yeah.
And we're thinking we're going to need to provide some technology just to make this trade possible. That if they open themselves up to the West, this maybe wouldn't be happening right now, because we would be there wouldn't be so much unevenness or envy or whatever. I don't know what's going on. It's not as far developed as I thought it would be by now.
And that's why when people tell me, look what capitalism did to Russia, that, all this poverty and people, their lifestyle drop. And I tell them, this is what happens when you let a former communist build capitalism. They don't understand how to build. They only know how to steal. And that's pretty much it, because Russia never got occupied by the United States. America never came in and forced that barrel the gun, now you build capitalism right now, and we'll show you how. Russians figure out themselves, and at all this crazy 90s we had, it was pretty much wild, wild west Russian style. They were just privatizing state companies, stealing, and people who, you got factory, and you got it illegally, so anytime government can turn around and take it away from you, so you just exploit, you don't maintain equipment, you're just trying to take all the profit you can and run away before they'll get you. So this introduction to capitalism by communists really didn't work really well for most former Soviet republics except Baltic states.
Yeah, it ended up in state capitalism and crony capitalism.
Yeah, it's, Putin kind of got it organized into his version of how the thing's supposed to be running. So yeah, it's pretty much, state capitalism. Every oligarch pays, 20% fee for running business to Putin, and then every oligarch has a government official attached to him that he provides him with services like, vacations on these $1 million yachts and staying in some cool places. So yeah, that's quite an interesting system that they design there.
Yeah, I think education might be the answer. That if we could get, more young Russian students into schools where they learn, about other opportunities,
Right.
other systems, other philosophies, other ways to do business.
Cryptocurrencies.
I mean, yeah, and I'm not saying, I don't mean to say that in any type of a we know best attitude, because we certainly need to learn a lot ourselves here in this country. I'm sure, Sergei, you have, it's not all perfect what you've seen so far since you've been in this country.
Absolutely. I mean, I came to America in '95 and I worked as a lifeguard in the inner city kids from Chicago camp. So I went through like almost backdoor. What I saw at camp, I was horrified. I mean, I wrote a book about it, but yeah, that was just, it was total shock culturally. And, the fact that even such a little, I'm talking to kids, about life in Chicago, and I noticed most of them saying my mom and my boy and her boyfriend. It's like, literally, I hardly heard not many children to say my father. And that was such a shock because I don't recall anyone back home that mothers had boyfriends. The whole concept, like if your mother should have a father, if you have a family. So my mom and her boyfriend thing wasn't just like, where all your fathers are? Like, why your mothers have boyfriends? So even like that part was pretty wild.
Yeah, there's so many stories about American culture that don't make it into movies, or they're not seen overseas, and so everyone has kind of this distorted vision of what it's like here in the United States. Yeah. But I mean, I can drive just 10 or 15 miles south of here, and I don't want to say it looks like it would be wrong to say it looks like a war zone. It doesn't, but there are some people really suffering, not doing well. And when I lived in Nevada, I lived in this area that when I first started teaching and I wasn't making much money, I was living in a trailer with a friend of mine who was also a teacher. And we were right on the edge of an Indian reservation I think the Washoe Indians. And during the middle of winter, I got in my car. I was just curious to see what the reservation was like. So I had a 4-wheel drive at the time. So I went one of those little Suzuki Samurai cars. And so I drove over to the reservation and just easily went through. But I saw a lot of people, drinking and just sitting outside of their trailer, 3 feet of snow on the ground. And it just did not look very nice at all.
Right.
And my friend who taught on the reservation came back with stories that, he was trying to teach American history, to Native Americans. It's like, that's your history. Right. And he wondered why they were so angry.
Well, it was I even have a silly example, when the American Hollywood movies started coming in, mostly end of the 80s. I had this weird, all you see is just pretty magazines and then movies. So I had this weird idea. It's just formed automatically in my head that all Americans' women are super hot. So when I got to New York, when I was staying first day in New York City in Columbia University, we went for a walk, and I have this all right, let's see this hot-looking American chicks. And I was like, what happened here? Where's all this supermodels supposed to walk on the street? Or all here, so even that is just, it just programs you when you watch America through TV, through movies, magazines. It creates this, picture of perfect smiles and perfect skins and beautiful looking people. So yeah, even that was kind of like, whoa.
Well, that's, so you would think that on social media it'd be more realistic, like, anybody can put stuff on their camera, but everyone does their own editing, and so they only put the best stuff on there for the world to see. And if you didn't know any better, you would think everyone around you is doing so well, they're so beautiful, everyone looks perfect in their pictures. So to wrap it up, are there any loose ends or things that we didn't get to talk about?
I just want to quickly add back to the sad topic of war in Ukraine. So the way I see, Russian plan failed. They wanted blitzkrieg. They wanted to take over Ukraine in short period of time, change the government. So right now, I'm just wondering which way it's going to go. Is it going to go the way like Finland, then they lost territory, and it's going to go the way that Russia actually, there'll be a blowback and Russia going to shatter and fall apart. So that's kind of what I'm right now really watching what's going on. And of course, my family is still in Ukraine. My mother is in occupied territory right now. So that adds a lot of stress. And my, brother and my father right in Kiev. So that's what right now is really scary.
I'm hoping for.
Go ahead, Vladan.
I really feel you, Sergei. I've been in a war myself, and I feel the pain. I had a conversation yesterday with my colleagues in Kiev, and I was like this during the whole Zoom call. I was not able to concentrate, and Just to tell you, I'm hoping for a second Maidan in Belarus, in Minsk, and for a third Maidan in Moscow.
Yeah, that would be great.
You said Maidan?
Yeah, well, it's like a revolution, pretty much.
Oh.
You know, people uprising. It's the area in Ukraine that's called Maidan, which it means like a square. You know, like
Oh,
city
right.
square. In Ukraine, it's Maidan, and that's what was happening. So that became like a word for people's uprising against oppressive government. You have a Maidan.
Yeah, because I remember Zelensky talked about Freedom Square. That
Yeah,
every
that's what. Yeah,
every
it's
every
Maidan
town
of
will have a.
Independence. They call it. Yeah.
Yeah, he said that every town would have a Freedom Square at the end of this war, and I just think when I see them protesting the occupation in some of these cities, I just think how courageous. Any one of them could be detained or shot, and just
Yeah.
so. I've never felt such intense emotion as when I was at the rally here in Sacramento. The first weekend, I think, after the war started, it was on that Sunday. And there's a Slavic population here of about 70,000. I think there were several thousand at the rally, but 70,000, half of which are probably Ukrainian, I think. It's a big population here. And just being there and hearing the music and hearing the prayers, it was a very religious group. It was filled with so much emotion. There is some, I've never seen this country as united on one side of a war as this one.
Right. Yeah, that's good news. I mean, there is still hope then.
Yeah, and had I known that your family was still there, I probably would have approached this conversation differently. I just hope the best, you know.
No, it's just, you know, I keep it like two parallel because I still have to function here, you know, do my work, everyday things. So it's I check with my family, make sure okay, and then I'm back to, you know, what I'm doing here. Yeah.
Well, so finally, what would because I've talked to I talked to a Marine, a retired Marine who wants to go fight, and I've talked to others who don't know really what they don't really feel like there's anything that they can do. But when I talk to Vladan, we think that, you know, this is an information war going on here. We can help by giving people the correct information and spreading the word.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think is the best thing that anybody can do?
Well, that's what I do, but you know, I speak fluent Russian, so until I'm banned on the Russian social media, I post there, you know, carefully because I don't want to anger people. Because there's plenty of pictures of dead Russian soldiers. Of course, you don't want to do anything like that. But I'll post some kind of like, "Hey, this war is not going really well for Putin," you know. So, but I'm Russian speaking, so I can, you know, I applied that on my Russian YouTube channel. But otherwise, at this point, yeah, I think there'll be more opportunities to help when it's over, you know, to rebuild the country. Then probably we can figure out what is the best way to support with money, with equipment. But yeah, currently it's honestly just, if anybody says anything, you know, supporting Putin, then definitely needs to have a conversation and find out why and explain, you know, that he is actually a criminal, that kind of danger for the whole, pretty much for the whole world, because, you know, he's really close to that red button. So
yeah, well, it'll come down to some good negotiating skills. He's going to get something out of it. They're trying to give him an easy way out. You know, here you can have this or this. You can have, we won't attack Crimea. You can keep that. Or Ukraine will be a part of the EU, but not be a member of NATO. Or, you know, you can have this part of the territory, but not this. You know, it's going to come down to that.
I said, I had impression that if you don't make Russian bear angry, he will stay in his woods, but I was totally wrong. I don't know what is the English word. In Russian, they're called medved shatun. So, you know, bears go to hibernation in the winter, right? But some bears wake up in the middle of winter. They're hungry, they're starving, and it's the most dangerous bear. It will attack anything. What I see Russia under Putin is Medved Shatun, is that hungry bear. You can't satisfy him. You give him a Crimea, he'll eat it and he will want more, because that's kind of like it's their mission. He put himself on this mission to rebuilding the great Russia. It's not about protecting Russian speaking population, all that blah, blah, blah. It's not about NATO. It's about restoring this great Russia, and that bear won't stop until he gets it, you know. So.
Well, so that suggests to me that you do the opposite, which is what we did. As much as I didn't agree with Ronald Reagan maybe back then, you overwhelmed them with force and with money and with weapon systems and with rhetoric, and you appear powerful because the bear will run away if you look either crazy or large or both.
It's, I don't know how to restore democratic institutions in Russia, because the West let it being destroyed in the last 20 years. I mean, we will watch how he destroyed everything, independent media, any opponents, any journalists. I mean, there's so many people get killed and nothing came out of it. So it's a big challenge, but that bear won't stop. You can't please him. It has its eyes on Moldova, on Ukraine, on Baltic states. Until it became great Russia again, it will never stop. So that's my opinion. It's changed me, turned me 180, because I was let's not make it angry, but that bear it was just a question of time. Clock was ticking. When bear felt strong enough, they went for it. So.
Wow. I don't know where to go from there other than to just thank you for your time. And hopefully we have like a little discussion when I turn off the recording button, because I have some things to talk to you guys about really quickly. But Sergei, I wish you the best, and especially on your YouTube channel and with your family. And Vladan, same to you. You're back in Sweden. You're safe for now. But I appreciate your contributions to the conversation too. I think people will learn a lot from things like this. They will learn, and this is how we change minds, change opinions, is to give them better information.